We've had some insane SMGs throughout Call of Duty history. We've gone over almost every type of SMG, but which SMGs were so good they had to be nerfed? They were so good, the developer, whether it was Treyarch, whether it was Infinity Ward, Sledgehammer, they had to drive them into the ground because they were too game-changing, game-breaking, overpowered, whatever keyword you want to use to describe them. Well, today we're going to go over that. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Non-AI Facecam Jimmy with you today. Like goal is 1,000, right on the nose. Just boom, 1,000 likes in the first 24 hours. Yes, I read every single comment on every single video, and today we're going to do the top 20 SMGs that were so good they had to be nerfed. They had to be almost put down. Okay, here we go in number 20, the Cuda in Black Ops 3. The Cuda, it just rolls off the tongue. The starting SMG in Black Ops 3, basically a futuristic MP5, and it had insanely consistent damage during the launch period. To the point, it was probably the best SMG in the game. 3-shot kill range, really good. Recoil was low, the reload animation was super quick, and it was really powerful in basically every scenario. Now, Treyarch issued a patch that reworked the range values, and after that, well, the Cuda was seen as a bit of an afterthought in the community because there was a better SMG in basically every situation. It used to be the jack-of-all-trades SMG in Black Ops 3, but after the nerf, it was kind of underwhelming. I think it's a good way to kick off today's list, and I want to say really quick, guys, I've been reading the comments lately. Thank you for all the love. I get so many stories and just comments of people that have watched me for over a decade or watched me throughout certain parts of their lives, and I'm truly humbled that you guys take the time to watch and interact with me. Just wanted to tell you that really quickly. At number 19, the Cordite in Black Ops 4. Now, this SMG's main appeal was a gigantic magazine and the manageable recoil that made it capable of constant damage and good pressure, but it had an operator mod that gave it this massive 300 round belt that you never had to reload. I mean, it would overheat if you held down the trigger for too long. When the game first launched, the overheating time was way too long. You could basically shred through the entire lobby before needing to stop and cool it down. But obviously, this was way too strong, so Treyarch patched the belt-fed attachment pretty hard. It reduced the amount of time you could fire before it overheated. Still good, but not busted. I mean, which is always a step in the right direction. At number 18, the PPSH-41 in Vanguard. Now, I may not be the biggest fan of Vanguard, but I will say this game's version of the PPSH is probably one of the most satisfying in COD history. For a while, the community was up in arms about how much of a melt machine it actually was. Eventually, Sledgehammer pushed out a patch for it to supposedly be nerfed. I say supposedly because the nerf really didn't do much. I mean, I guess it slightly made it less powerful, but you would almost never notice the difference. But it was an insane SMG that technically got nerfed, even if the nerf didn't really nerf. So it gets a spot today. I like giving the Vanguard community some love whenever I can because it doesn't come very often. And I know some of you absolutely love Vanguard despite its reputation. And you know what? I respect that. At number 17, the MP5 in Modern Warfare 2019. Now, it's kind of hard to believe that this monster was never nerfed, or that it was ever nerfed. Not never nerfed, but Infinity Ward actually issued several patches throughout that season, some of which they actually did in secret. The MP5 was the most popular SMG in the game right out of the gate. Versatility, fantastic time to kill. Throughout the year, it was hit with a lot of little tweaks and adjustments. Some patches would reduce the range. Some patches would nerf certain attachments. Some would slow down the handling, but no matter what Infinity Ward did, it never removed it from the top of the SMG power ranking. At number 16, the Daemon 3XB in Black Ops 4, the burst SMG that was pretty strong when it was first added as DLC, and I think Treyarch panicked after everyone started talking about how insane the time to kill was with it, so they issued a nerf. Now that nerf, it didn't really do anything. All the nerf did was make it slightly less accurate and reduce the effectiveness at longer ranges, but this was an SMG, so who was worried about it at long range? The Daemon wasn't easy to use since it was a burst fire SMG, but if you were able to stay on target, the time to kill on this thing was through the roof, and since the nerfs really didn't do anything, it kind of remained dominant from launch all the way to today. At number 15, the MSMC in Black Ops 2. Did you guys know this was actually nerfed? Everyone remembers the MSMC for being the MLG SMG of choice during the Black Ops 2 era, but a lot of you probably forgot that Treyarch actually patched it a couple times because it was actually even better during the first few weeks of the game's life cycle. When Black Ops 2 first launched, the MSMC had that great damage and time to kill, but it was even more accurate than the version you probably got used to. Treyarch pushed out a patch in March of 2013 that increased that recoil. It widened the hip fire spread a little bit, but obviously that didn't kick the gun off the top spot of the SMG tier list. But yeah, the MSMC actually got nerfed. a couple times. At number 14, the Vector CRB and COD Ghosts. Now, when you think of SMGs from Ghost, you probably think of the MTAR X. But there was a time when the Ghost version of the Vector was the dominant SMG, and it wasn't until it was nerfed that the MTAR rose to the top. Now, usually in COD, the Vector has this high fire rate, low recoil, low damage, but the Ghost version, it was different. Moderate rate of fire, moderate recoil, but very high base damage. It made it a great choice for competitive play. Now, after a while, Infinity Ward stepped in to nerf the range and the handling. Still solid, but it wasn't as good. At number 13, the MP40 and Vanguard. Now, Vanguard had some fun guns, even if they weren't exactly historically accurate once you started loading them up with attachments. The MP40 in the game felt great, had a fantastic time to kill, which led it to being the dominant close-range weapon for the longest. Sledgehammer hit it pretty hard with a series of patches. It dropped down the damage range, the accuracy, eventually pushed it off the top of the hill. Still good in the right hands, but not even close to as dominant out of the box like it was. At number 12, the Tanto 22 and Black Ops 6. Now, I remember when people got their hands on the Tanto, and they kind of went nuts with it. This SMG fires super slow, but it hits like a truck, capable of getting two-shot kills from pretty far away, or at least it was capable of that. When Black Ops 6 first launched, the Tanto's two-shot kill range was way more generous than it is right now, as long as you were aiming at the upper body, and there was a lot of people who thought it needed to be brought back down to earth a little. I guess it was still a relatively high-skill weapon, because even though it was an SMG with a two-shot kill potential, you still had to aim high, you had to keep up with the fast movement of the game, so it's not like anyone could pick it up and dominate a lobby. But then again, the OG Tanto's two-shot kill range was kind of dumb. Treyarch eventually made some tweaks to it to make it a bit more skillful, not quite as easy to abuse. At number 11, the MAC-10 and Warzone 2020. Now, the Warzone community was excited for the Black Ops Cold War integration back in 2020 because this was the first time ever in a Call of Duty game that they had done something like this. But as all of you know, Activision wasn't actually planning on doing an integration like this until just a few months before the update was supposed to go live, which meant a lot of corners had to be cut. One of those corners was balancing. About 80% of the Black Ops guns were completely useless in Warzone, but the remaining 20% were completely overpowered, and one of those was the MAC-10. Had a blazing fire rate, super low recoil, very generous damage per shot, which made it the best gun in the game for close and mid-range. Now, it took a while, but it was eventually nerfed into something a bit more acceptable, but if you were playing OG Warzone during the first few weeks of the Black Ops Cold War year, you know. At number 10, the ASM-1 in Advanced Warfare. Most of you probably don't even know this, but the ASM-1 actually was nerfed a couple times. Those nerfs, they just didn't do anything to fix it. This was by far the best SMG in the game, completely dominated most scenarios, with most of the AW community calling it the second best gun in the game, right behind the BAL. Sledgehammer, they actually issued a couple patches to the ASM-1 to tone down the fire rate. They even reduced the size of the default magazine, but they never actually adjusted the thing that mattered: the damage. You can reduce the fire rate, you can make the magazine smaller, but the damage was too high. That's what kept it at the top for the entire life cycle. At number 9, the Jackal PDW in Black Ops 6. Raise your hand if you remember how busted this thing was during the Black Ops 6 beta. Everybody thought Treyarch was going to nerf it to the ground for the full release, but they only slightly tweaked it. So the Jackal, still nuts on launch day. And then a few weeks later, they nerfed it again. It was still one of the most popular guns in the game after that. I mean, the Jackal has been nerfed several times since Black Ops 6 launched, and it's still a very strong gun, but it's not quite as busted as it was in the beta. That's the main reason it's here today. The beta version of the Jackal, it was absurd. Treyarch was definitely right to bring it down a little. At number 8, the Switchblade X9 in Black Ops 4. This thing was added to multiplayer, it completely took over. Super lightweight, insane fire rate, super low recoil. The Switchblade X9 was basically what happens when a gun like the Scorpion Evo is also a laser beam. Treyarch let it be overpowered for a while since it was a DLC gun and they needed to make some money, right? But eventually it was hit with a pretty substantial nerf that reduced the range, basically just turning it into a reskin of the Spitfire SMG, which was one of the base weapons of Black Ops 4, albeit with a slightly slower fire rate and slightly less recoil for close range combat. But first month or two, it went hard. At number 7, the GKS in Black Ops 4. Now, I'm noticing a lot of Treyarch guns on this list now. What do you guys think about that? The GKS was one of the SMGs in Black Ops 4 at launch. Now, it didn't have an amazing fire rate, but what it did have was amazing accuracy and range, which made it one of the most consistent SMGs in the game, even if it didn't kill that quickly. Hardcore modes, it shined. It was kind of busted. Honestly, it was kind of insane. I mean, you had the accuracy of a laser beam, you had the mobility of an SMG. It was hit with a very noticeable damage and range nerf a little while into the game cycle, to the point that you rarely saw it in core game modes anymore, but it did remain popular in hardcore because of the great mobility and the handling. I mean, yeah, the one-shot kill range was reduced pretty drastically, but that two-shot kill range, still kind of nutty. At number 6, the Razorback in Black Ops 3. I still remember how crazy this thing was in the beta. Fire rate was moderate, but the recoil was, well, there was no recoil, and the damage was just jacked up. And it honestly had forgiving range drop-off too. So you had this great time to kill up close, great time to kill mid and long range, and it didn't kick at all, and it had some of the best mobility in the game. The OG Razorback was ridiculous. And Treyarch was it was obvious they were gonna nerf it for the full release of the game, but many fans think they went too far. Razorback in Black Ops 3 today, it's just kind of a weapon that's there. It feels smooth, it's fun to use, but it's not that good. It went from S tier to C tier in the blink of an eye. Now we arrive at the top 5. The LC-10 in Black Ops Cold War was added to Cold War as DLC a few months after the game came out, and it wasn't as busted as some of the other DLC guns in the game, but it was definitely top tier in the SMG meta at the time, to the point Treyarch was probably right to hit it with the nerf hammer. They probably just went a little too hard. They swung too hard. It was a laser beam, had good mid-range performance, but what made it so strong was the extremely generous base damage that made it arguably the best mid-range gun in the game, even better than the assault rifles. That's crazy, right? It was way too versatile. Something had to be done, which meant the damage range and the headshot bonuses had to be heavily nerfed and the recoil had to be slightly increased. Like I said, some people think the nerfs went too far, but it was really strong. I mean, you just had to work a little harder to see the power now. At number 4, the Vesper in Black Ops 3. The bullet hose. It was ridiculous on launch. Come on. Then it fell victim to a string of nerfs and rebuffs, but it never really got back to the top of the mountain. Fired at 1,200 rounds per minute. And when the game first came out, the recoil was pretty manageable with all things said, which lets you melt people from mid-range. I mean, Treyarch wasn't going to let it stand. They nerfed it hard. They increased the recoil drastically. They reduced its mid-range damage, and following the initial nerf, they tried to buff it back to a solid place, but they would eventually go too far and have to nerf it again. So it was going up and down throughout the year in the community. They got tired of it, but at the end of the day, the Vesper was an amazing SMG on launch day. And even after it got nerfed, it was probably still top 5. At number 3, the Tech 9 in Black Ops Cold War. Semi-auto SMG added to the game a few months after release, and at first people didn't think much of it because it was semi-auto. Then people started experimenting with the gunsmith builds when that's where things went off the rails. Not only could the gun completely melt anybody who got close, but it also had a full auto attachment you could throw on it where you didn't have to have a good trigger finger. It completely took over Black Ops Cold War's multiplayer, and Treyarch definitely took their sweet time issuing a patch, probably because it was part of a season battle pass, but it's still pretty good today. Nowhere near as busted as it was. If you look at videos of the original version, you can see why the community was pretty pissed off that it didn't get nerfed quicker. At number 2, the XMC in Black Ops 3. This thing was just busted. COD fans talk about broken DLC weapons. This is usually one of the first guns that gets brought up, and there's a reason for that. It was meant to be a remake of the MSMC from Black Ops 2. But Treyarch decided to buff it in every possible fashion, which led to it being game-breaking. Faster fire rate, high damage, lower recoil than the MSMC. Objectively the best gun in the game for weeks until it was finally hit with a nerf. You pick it up today, it's high tier, possibly top tier. I mean, maybe, I don't know, but it's not OP, which is good. But when this thing was at its peak and it was locked behind supply drops, people were pissed. At number 1, the PDW in Black Ops 2. When I think of SMGs that were nerfed into oblivion, this comes to mind immediately. Huge magazine, moderate fire rate. It was also a total laser beam with a great time to kill, which made it one of the best guns in Black Ops 2, especially for competitive play. I correct that. It was the best gun on day 1. But after launch, Treyarch decided they had created a monster, so they killed the monster. The recoil was increased drastically, and I swear they toned down the damage as well, because this thing went from a melt machine to just an absolute pea shooter. It was one of the top 5 guns in the game, if not the best gun in the game, and overnight it went to the bottom 5. So yeah, I don't think there's a better choice for number 1. Give me 2 guns that were nerfed, SMGs that is, that we didn't mention. See you guys soon.